Hey everybody, Dutch Sense here. 6:19 a.m. Central Time on Tuesday, February 3rd, 2015. And we're looking at Earthquake 3D, which is a USGS feed of the most recent earthquakes. And I just wanted to draw your attention to a few things that have developed over the past couple days. And this might look like a jumbled mess to you right now, so let me just turn it down for the last 24 hours and show you the events that have happened across the Midwest. Okay? The area of Colorado, specifically the area of Trinidad, Colorado, we were watching for movement. And this was based upon the multiple 4.0 earthquakes that have happened over the past several days in Oklahoma, shown here with the larger range rings happening out of fracking operations in Oklahoma, and also a 3.1 and subsequent swarm in southern Texas developed at 2 fracking operations in Texas. Now this may come as a surprise to the professionals in Texas who are still denying that fracking causes earthquakes. However, if you go look up these earthquakes, let's just go ahead and look up the earthquake in southern Texas here just to prove the point. And these are coordinates provided by the USGS for the epicenter of the earthquake. And we will paste these in on Google Earth and go look them up. And of course, this is bringing us in on southern Texas. There's San Antonio to the northwest. And here's the earthquake. So, okay, within 100 to 200 feet away, we've got the nearest frac well. And let me zoom in here. We've got our storage tanks, we've got our pipeline apparatus, and of course, it is part of a much larger operation. Each one of these square pads here is a different oil or fracking operation. Let me just zoom in on a random pad here. Okay, we've got 4 different pipeline, that's a pipeline pad. Here's another pipeline pad. Looks like we've got a lot of injection wells going on here, where what they'll do is they'll pump in water from a storage pond and inject that down into the earth. Now, what do we have here? Looks like a frac well, pipeline, and a compressing station. And they'll eventually compress all this gas into liquid natural gas and pipe it off. So look at the size of that operation. For the Texas Railroad Commission, the people who manage the wells in Texas, for them to deny that at this point, it's kind of asinine, actually. I'm not even going to address it other than to say it's foolish for them to do that. Let's go ahead and look up the earthquake in Colorado, though. That's the one that we were watching for. That's the one that was forecast for. And yes, it was forecast. I've been issuing earthquake forecasts now for the last several years and really refined it down over the last couple months, let's say 6 months to a year. Have gotten it down to a science that people can repeat, which is watching for patterns in earthquakes and watching the adjacent areas for movement. And why is that such a big deal? Because geologists and seismologists say that one earthquake is not related to another over distance, especially smaller earthquakes. So they would say to you that the 4.0s in Oklahoma are not related to the 3.1 that just struck here in Colorado at the fracking operation that's due west of the large earthquake activity that I just showed you. So here's the frac well, here's a huge fracking operation. And let's just back this out. Okay, and these are the wells that I marked, but each one of these little pads here, you can probably see them on the screen if you full screen it here, is a different oil or injection well. And so let's get back over here to Earthquake 3D. We had a series of 4.0 earthquakes as denoted by the large ring here. Just happened over the past several days, and that was 5 different 4.0 earthquakes. 4.3, 4.2, and 3 different 4.0 earthquakes happened at the Oklahoma fracking operations. So this led me to issue a forecast for the area due west at the Trinidad fracking operations. And lo and behold, in between the areas, Amarillo moved, and that's a different fracking operation. Feel free to go look these up, guys. You don't have to take my word for it. Just showed you all these down here. Just showed you this here in Colorado. You guys can take the time to look up the rest of these earthquakes, okay? So, and the way you do it, again, is just pull the coordinates from the USGS, put them in on Google Earth, and go look and see what's there. Spend some time looking around. You'll be shocked to find what's at some of these locations. For instance, where this 2.5 happened, down here at the border of New Mexico and Arizona, is an old dormant volcano. Dormant volcano showing activity. Or the swarm location, where you see all these earthquakes in this larger ring right here, and these associated earthquakes in northwest Nevada, that's at an old dormant volcano. And the area off the west coast, just due west of Eureka and west of the coast of Oregon, new lavic fields have formed over the last several years, which buried USGS sensors. And that's how they even found the lavic fields to begin with. They didn't know they were forming. That means undersea volcanic activity right off the west coast. So, look at the movement to the west. Color coding wise, the darker these are, red, the older they are. So we're looking at a flurry of 2 and 3.0 earthquakes over the last week, with a series of shallower, larger earthquakes happening along the edge of the craton. And that terminates here in Texas. So we've got a swarm of earthquakes here in North Texas going up into Oklahoma, and that swarm backfills out to Colorado at the fracking operation and down here to South Texas. Nothing to the east. All this movement to the west, nothing to the east. This movement here is pushing on the edge of the North American plate, and that's going to cause displacement up the east coast at some point, just like it happened a few weeks ago when the swarm of earthquakes developed in Connecticut and the 4.2 struck in Quebec and the swarm struck in New Brunswick. Most people don't know about this stuff because they're smaller events, but that's what's going on. It leads to larger events, so that's why we need to watch now. Internationally, let me just show you a few things that are going on. New Swarm, which I covered in my last video, also did a post on this showing St. George Island, a new volcano, most likely, is forming undersea about 20 to 40 miles east of St. George Island. And that's no doubt about it. If you guys pay attention to the news of the next couple months, they may come out and even announce it. Who knows? That's just a guess of mine, but it's a good guess based upon the activity that's going on there and the history of the area surrounding it. As I said, the darker these are, the older they are, and the higher they are off the planet, the deeper they are into the Earth. These are earthquake 3D features. So you can see a 6.0, these large rings here. 6.3 magnitude earthquake struck in Vanuatu, and that's north of New Zealand, just east of Fiji. Now, the deep movement is always followed by shallow movement to the northwest of it. So, when you see these deep earthquakes happening down in the asthenosphere, which is the area of semi-melted magma that exists below the plates, that is then followed up with 4 and 5.0 swarms in the area to the northwest of the deep movement. Whether it's over here in the Pacific, okay, in the East Pacific, where we saw 6.0 happen at a moderately deep level, that's always followed by shallower movement to the northwest. And to show that to you, let me just show you the 5.0 earthquakes. Let me turn this setting up here. Okay, so here's our 5.0 and greater earthquakes over the last 7 days. And you can see, first, the lighter earthquakes are more recent, the darker earthquakes are older. So, kicked off with the 6.0, followed by a flurry of 5.0s nearby, which then spread up to the northwest across the entire plate of the West Pacific. Also, over here in the East Pacific, first we saw the movement here in the West Pacific displace over to the East Pacific with these 5.0 earthquakes, which then displaced here with these brighter, newer earthquakes, which then displaced a deeper portion of the plate down here in Chile at the border of Argentina and Chile. So 5.7, lone earthquake out here in the middle where the stress point meets. So you can imagine this whole area moving, being pushed up from deep, displacing here, displacing all the way up here to Alaska, causing a new volcanic eruption undersea most likely, and then that relieves the pressure right here, which then leaves this area silent. Same thing's happening down to the south. It spills across through the Easter Island region, then spills over to Central America and down to South America where it terminates with large earthquakes, and this builds. You'll see the pressure build and build and build into one large earthquake following all these 5.0s, and that's what's happened down here to the south. Now, up here in the United States, it's a very particular situation. Our snag point is anywhere from Los Angeles to Eureka, and then up to the west coast off of Oregon, and then going all the way up to British Columbia. Several different points showed movement over the last several years. Of course, the 7.7 that struck in BC, the moderate 6.0 that struck on Napa Valley, which caused a lot of damage, and then a series of 4 and 5.0s that kicked off down here to the south near Salton Sea to Los Angeles. So we can expect larger movement to occur somewhere in this region in the near term because of the amount of movement that's happened elsewhere. A single 5.7 almost a week ago, and that's the only movement to compensate for all this other activity all around the rest of the Pacific. Meaning, we need to watch the weak spots first, which haven't shown movement yet. That kind of narrows it down. So, this area already moved off the west coast. That means the area to the northwest, most likely between, again, British Columbia and the coast of Oregon, and south from Los Angeles south through Baja California. And then that picks up throughout the entire silent area of Mexico. It's a large area to watch, but it's an area that should show movement. Again, they have their own snag point, as you might want to call it, where the Pacific Plate is showing tremendous stress in the past by producing large earthquakes. And that was the multiple 8.0 and 7.0 earthquakes that struck down near Mexico City. There's been a series of volcanic eruptions in Mexico, which show that the stress is building to the point of allowing larger eruptions, which we wouldn't normally see in a quieter time. One other thing, let me go ahead and show you the activity in Europe. This is just amazing to see. The spillover of earthquakes that happen. They say this could never happen, that one region over here in the Pacific could displace Europe. But we saw the progression of earthquakes transfer across North India, going across the Mideast, and then terminating here at Greece with this larger 5.3 almost a week ago, and then the swarm, which is now off the map, that happened in central Italy. That put pressure on the entire region. When the swarm hit in Italy on the 23rd, issued a warning for the region telling UK, watch out, you're going to see movement. UK saw it, 3.9, 2.9. Also issued warning for Poland, said watch out for a 4 to 5.0 earthquake in the next 5 to 7 days, and Poland got the 4.3 we were watching for. Also issued the warning for Algeria to Gibraltar. Let me zoom in. This is Algeria. This is Gibraltar. Issued a warning for this region here over the next 5 to 7 days, and it got hit with 4.7 and a 4.0. The reason this earthquake forecast method is working is I'm taking a basic thing into account. And I think anybody can do earthquake forecasting if they take a few things into account. One, earthquakes transfer over a distance. Larger earthquakes lead to smaller earthquakes, which lead to larger earthquakes again. And earthquakes transfer across distances in the opposite direction than we have been taught. So you have to look at each region, watch the age of the earthquake versus the size of the earthquake, and the depth of the earthquake versus the location of the earthquake. And by taking all those accounts into effect, you can actually determine a location to watch for movement in a 5 to 7 day period. In other words, you can come up with a 1 week forecast for earthquakes that's accurate. And I can be confident in telling you that when there's movement in the southern portion of the craton, here in the 4.0 range, that's causing a displacement across the entire western portion of the plate, that's going to put pressure on the eastern portion of the plate, and that narrows down our area to watch for moderate movement in an unexpected area. So you I will issue an earthquake watch warning for the East Coast from the states of North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, New York, and Pennsylvania, and possibly extending up into South Quebec. Just like you would for a large snowstorm, we can issue for an earthquake watch zone. Now, it doesn't mean panic. It doesn't mean go out and buy 1,000 years worth of supplies. It means that if you operate a facility that maybe has highly sensitive electronics, that you might want to be on watch and be ready to go in case something does happen. And if you are worried about a larger event, like I am, you have to watch for the silence to develop. You have to watch for all this movement to happen and nothing to release here. That lets you then know about the magnitude or the location for swarms, which can be equally as devastating as one single large magnitude earthquake. A swarm can sit there and shake something and cause foundational stresses that a single shockwave earthquake might not. Or conversely, a large earthquake could cause serious damage when a series of swarms might not. So, it's something we need to pay attention to. It's something that we can narrow down to a region and a time to watch for. That's called a forecast. That means it can be done. I'm not just picking these areas out of a hat. I think I've thoroughly explained how I'm choosing the areas to watch. The silent areas next to the adjacent areas that are showing heavy movement. It doesn't take a rocket scientist. It does take a rewriting of the textbooks, though, because the old thought is that these areas are too vast and that there's too many fault zones that can compensate and go off in the other direction, so you cannot say one earthquake leads to another. That's what they used to say. However, when you see a 5.0 earthquake strike the fracking operation at Colorado and a 5.9 earthquake strike at Virginia and cause damage on the East Coast in the same 24-hour period, you can know that the pressure that's coming from the west is putting pressure to the east. And so you see a 5.0 here and it causes a 5.9 here in the same day in 2011. That's no coincidence. That earthquakes do transfer over a distance, and it was right to be watching in 2011 on the East Coast, and people should have been warned then. Unfortunately, no one was paying attention, and I was in my first stages of developing and watching earthquakes and trying to figure out the pattern in which this is occurring. And luckily for tools like this, the color coding that lets you know older earthquake versus younger earthquake, the depth of the earthquake, and the location of the earthquake plotted on a 3D globe, aids tremendously in understanding the pattern in which earthquakes occur. And if something occurs in a pattern, which it does in this case, then it can be predicted to some extent. Unless some new outside source is inserted, you can start to see a pattern. Okay guys, much love.